Welcome back to my series covering the 2023 season of the TGR GT Cup. If you remember from the first round, we got some okay points, but despite being in the 380s, they'll probably not amount for anything when all of the top scores are tallied up. I imagine the top three are going to have all over 400 points, if not at the high 390s. But anyways, what you're watching right now is slot 2, and you may be able to tell that it's not going so well, but that's not even where the heartbreak started. For that, let's jump back about 2 hours before when I tried to enter slot 1.
Alright guys.
When I was able to gather my composure, we ended up just watching our friend Sosa go ahead and win that slot on my stream. Little did he know that he had 190 people watching him, and it's probably a good thing because he might not have been able to pull off that win, but anyways, we're really proud of him. But what we couldn't tell before entering this race is that the points in this race weren't going to matter at all. And we definitely knew that by the time we were on track, which will fully explain how I drove, so let's get into it. Despite being incredibly upset about missing the first slot, I somehow managed to put it in second place for the race, but that was short-lived. I made a really big mistake right at the start of the race. For no reason, I lifted off the throttle. I guess I shouldn't say no reason. This car, like many of the road cars, actually shifts faster if you lift off the throttle rather than letting the game simulate the full shift. And for some reason, my brain thought, all right, we're starting, so it's like a shift. And I lifted off the throttle, which made it very easy for Windfire and Randy to attack right at the beginning. And all I could do was hold on. And I thought I had done a pretty good job, but you can see from this corner right here, I lifted off the brakes really suddenly and just slid, understeered after oversteer, and all the way in the grass. I think I have two main weaknesses when it comes to racing still. The first is that I can really choke under pressure, especially in qualifying. I almost never nail a qualifying lap that I really want to. It's not never, but it's almost never. And my second greatest weakness is just completely melting down when something goes wrong. First, just sitting there for 2 hours after being super prepared for a race. I spent 1,500 miles preparing for this race. After all of that, and having to sit there for 2 hours waiting for my next slot, it was just eating away at me. I was in a better mood because I had done so well in the quali, and I knew that I had good race pace, but then when I made that mistake at the start, it just all started cascading. And luckily, when I went off track, I was finally able to get my focus in and start focusing on actually getting back up and trying to fight, but by then it had really been too late. I was so frustrated that I'd forgotten to actually record this race, so you can't see any of the moments leading up to it, and so you don't know that the points were so low, even though it's just the second slot, that even the winner of this race, the points from this race probably won't at all count towards the eventual championship at the end of the year. I think that was probably why I was able to get my focus back up and really get in there and try to battle with the boys, because honestly, in the end of the day, this race ended up not mattering for anything except recovering some DR, so I just went on the attack. You can see from all the times that I've slid the car that I wasn't at all trying to protect the tires, and there wasn't a lot you could do to protect the tires, but the one thing you could do is not slide, and I was ignoring all of that. All three of the guys ahead are multiple World Tour drivers. Lester was a GT Academy finalist when I was a semi-finalist, the first time that I ever made any kind of event. And if you recognize the name R. Haywood, it's because, yeah, that is the real person that a lot of you get to race in the single-player mode. If you recognize that name, then you know what I'm up against. The real one is obviously much more formidable than the AI version, and you'll see throughout this race that he definitely lives up to his name. So far in this race, Lester has it the easiest. He's out in front, and obviously the pressure of being out in front with these people behind you is not exactly easy, but he hasn't had to contend with battling or passing anyone at all, so he can focus on maintaining his pace while preserving his tires. And like I said earlier, there's not a lot you can do to preserve the tires. One of the main things you can do is not slide, and so obviously he can avoid sliding because he doesn't have to worry about doing anything except following his own line. There's also been a lot of talk recently about the potential that steering angle means a lot more than anything else in GT7. In GT Sport, it seems to be brake pressure. A lot of the really fast guys would brake at around 80% leaning into corners, extending their braking zones so that you wouldn't eat up the front tires. That seems to have less of an effect. In fact, I'm so bad at it that usually when I try to save my tires through braking, I end up messing up the corners so much that I end up wearing my tires. I should note right now that Randy is making an attack on Windfire, and that plays a really big part in what's about to happen. But talking about tires, like I said, steering angle, not sliding the tires, and maybe not braking at 100%, but it seemed like in this race that didn't matter quite as much, but I wasn't doing anything to preserve my tires whatsoever. Knowing that two people going into this corner is usually a recipe for disaster, I prepared myself to get in front of anyone I could, and the opportunity arose and I was able to get right in front of Windfire. In the back of my mind, I really knew that nothing really mattered in this race. I obviously didn't want to ruin it for either of the other guys or any of the guys in this race, but it really didn't matter which one of us won this race, and Lester was probably going to have it anyways, but I thought, why not go for the win? Why not do whatever I can just to pass people, to just recover as much DR as possible, and anyways, it's a lot of fun. If the race isn't going to be important for the championship, at least have fun and put on a show. This was also a moment of reflection for me. As I was first starting to make this video, I was actually getting really upset all over again at how poorly my season's gone in general and how bad I did in this race, on top of how bad my luck was leading up to this when I got disconnected. But as I'm watching this, I'm realizing that these are people that I had never really mixed it up with before last year. I'd raced against them many times, but in general it was just them passing me or me being around them as they were putting on really good shows. But the fact that I was actually mixing it up with these guys, and I have a few times over the last year, kind of puts in perspective how much I have improved, and it helps me consider the fact that I can continue improving despite being a relatively old age for all of this. And so my confidence is coming back a little bit. Now, if you look at my tires, you can see that they are fairly destroyed. That was a lot more tire wear than I'd gotten in any of the practice races that I'd done. And while I wasn't necessarily trying to do anything in those races to save the tires, I was at the very least not drifting around corners, and I of course wasn't battling people, taking weird lines and being aggressive. And so obviously just trying to be smooth would save the tires. But yeah, again, I was just focused on trying to pass people if I possibly could and maybe catch up to Lester even if I wasn't able to hold the position. Like I said, I want to make passes, obviously, but even though I wasn't trying to save tires, I did, at least in the back of my mind, have the idea that I shouldn't make any kind of crazy passes, possibly not a lunge that could destroy my tires even more, and I was telling myself that I wasn't going to. And then this tiny, barely anything of a possibility arose, and I said, yeah, let's just go for it. Let's pass Randy, why not? And of course, I shouldn't have, but it felt good passing Randy at the time. Of course, it wasn't the best idea, but like I said, we're just trying to make passes, have fun, not ruin anyone's race, and yeah, that's all I could do. You may have noticed I had the fastest lap of the race so far, and jumping ahead all the way to lap 8, you can see that I kept up a pretty good pace, which was another kind of painful thing. It was bittersweet, I should say. I was happy that my practice had paid off, but of course, it didn't really mean anything because I wasn't able to use it for anything meaningful. But you can also look at my tires and see that just on lap 8, they're almost completely done. I was able to make the tires last until lap 14 in practice at one point. Usually they'd go off between 11 and 12, and with all of the hard driving I was doing, they were about to go off at the beginning of lap 9. Not only that, you can see that that was the slowest lap that I had just done. Randy was, on the other hand, doing really well, and so it was about time just to give it up. After you race with the same people over the years, you get to know them a lot of the time. So a lot of us, despite the fact that we're trying to beat each other, are also sharing information with each other. And so I've been speaking with Windfire, and I knew that he could actually have tires left at the end of the race. And in fact, ever since the very first time that I'd raced him, I'd known that he was incredibly good at saving tires. And I think that just shows how good of a driver he is in general. He's just very precise, doesn't do a lot of wasted things, and so he's able to make tires last longer than even most of the other top split drivers. Randy's incredible. Lester, I wasn't getting any close to him. He's been incredibly good since the very first time that I even started playing competitive Gran Turismo. And with Windfire that far back, it wasn't because he didn't have the pace. He was certainly just able to maintain his tires, and so it was the beginning of the end for me. At this point, pretty much all I can do is accept the fact that my tires are going to die, do what I can to maintain enough momentum through the corners, then hope that the slipstream will carry me far enough to defend from Windfire, but with 6 laps left, there wasn't anything I was going to be able to do. What happened right here, however, gave me just the smallest glimmer of hope, but that was very, very short-lived. I knew as soon as I saw the line that Randy took that he was going to get a penalty. However, that's only a half-second penalty, so at that exact spot on the next lap, he was going to have to brake for essentially half a second. The game would brake for him, and then any opportunity would be had right about then. But I was going to be at absolutely 0 tire at that point. It seemed like Randy still had a good amount of tire left, and Windfire was now on the attack. With that big mistake that I made, Windfire was really easily able to capture my position, and if he got close enough to Randy, then he could definitely take advantage of that half-second penalty, but I was already so far back that it wouldn't affect me whatsoever, and I was right. It didn't affect me at all. Jumping forward to Randy serving the penalty, he had actually made enough of a gap between him and Windfire that he was able to maintain that position, which is just, it's really crazy to think how much pace that he had. I said earlier that he had enough tire to defend or to keep up a good amount of pace, but in reality he might not have. I didn't actually check. He is just an incredible driver, so there's a good chance that he had as low tire that I did, and he was able just to continue with that pace. Now, I wasn't about to rage quit, especially considering how much it could affect my DR. 4th place is definitely better than either losing the race or rage quitting the race, but I definitely wasn't exactly trying. I have to admit that all I was trying to do now was stay ahead of Pop, who was about 3 seconds, maybe 4 seconds behind, and he wasn't gaining at all. I think if I drove as fast as I possibly could with these tires, then I might have ended up maybe a half second closer to them, but regardless of that fact, they were gone. There's nothing that I can do. And like I mentioned before, this did kind of help me put everything into a bit of perspective. I did have good pace. If I was in the first slot, who knows what would have happened, because a lot of stuff went down in that race. Sosa won, I believe was the highest score he'd ever gotten. He's now in contention to go to the World Finals in this series. And a lot of stuff happened in the middle of the pack where I could have gotten caught up in it, and I could have had a terrible race and had to do this race anyways. With that said, considering what I did in quali for this race, and what I was able to do pace-wise, if I was able to have just a clean race, I might have been the one to win it. I might have gotten 2nd place. Who knows? Anything could have happened. But I should focus on the fact that I was, for a time, mixing it up with Randy and Windfire. I had good pace, and I qualied well. And that's really what I should think of, I think. At the end of the day, my last season when I actually did make it to the World Finals actually started off worse than this. And there's still 6 races left, so anything can happen. I'll be covering the rest of these races, win or lose, so please don't forget to like and subscribe if you liked it, and stay tuned for the next round.